She was barefoot, shivering, and clutching a dog-eared birth certificate when she stepped through the gates of the locked-down estate. The mansion had been sealed for years, its heirs long dead, its riches buried behind rusted chains. Lawyers. Scoffed, security shoved her back. But then she whispered a name, the name no one dared to speak. Silence. A guard stepped aside. She was suddenly inside. But who was she really? And how did a homeless girl know the family's darkest secret? The one worth killing for? Rainwater clung to the hem of her jeans like chains, darkening the frayed fabric until it felt heavier than her own body. Mara stood outside the gates, shoulders hunched, clutching the torn birth certificate so tightly the paper softened in her damp palms. The iron bars loomed, rust blooming like disease along the hinges the padlock furred with. Years of disuse. She could almost hear the house breathing on the other side. Dotting her mind came a flash, a soft humming in the dark, a woman's voice brushing lullabies against her cheek, a locket glinting near her tiny fist. She hadn't seen the woman's face. The memory ended, as it always did, with the sound of boots on wood and a door slamming shut. "Move along," the guard barked, his breath visible in the cold. He didn't even look at her, just tightened his grip on the flashlight like it might burn her away. Behind him, two suited lawyers whispered, their umbrella tips digging into the gravel as they stared. Mara swallowed hard. She wanted to run. She always wanted to run, but instead she stepped closer, bare feet slick against the stones. "This belongs to me," she said, voice almost a whisper. She lifted the birth certificate, shaking so badly she thought it might tear in two. One of the lawyers finally glanced up. A middle-aged man with wet spectacles and lines etched deep into his mouth. He took the paper like it was dirty. "These pop up all the time. Forged. Desperate," he said, folding it sharply. "The Langley estate is closed, sealed. You have no claim." She should have felt small under their disdain. She didn't. "Look at the name," she said softly. The guard snorted, shifting his flashlight beam across her face, up and down. "I said move." Mara stepped forward, so close to the gate her nose brushed the cold iron. She whispered the name. It was a name she'd held like a blade for years, a name that burned when spoken aloud. The lawyers froze mid-breath. The guard's hand trembled around the flashlight. "Where did you hear that?" the lawyer asked. Mara didn't answer. She saw the flicker of fear in his eyes and pressed the advantage, her spine straightening for the first time. The guard hesitated, then unlocked the gate. The groan of rusted iron swallowed the rain. Mara stepped through as if walking into a tomb. Inside the grounds, the house rose like a broken cathedral. Windows boarded, ivy gripping the stone like skeletal fingers. The air carried the smell of rotten dust and something older, as if the walls remembered every lie ever whispered inside them. She stopped on the threshold, tracing the crack that ran along the frame, and wondered if the floor would give way under her weight. "Get her out of here," one of the lawyers muttered behind her, voice sharp with panic. "This isn't," Mara turned, meeting his gaze. "You know who I am," she said. He flinched. Not because she was wrong, but because she wasn't. She gripped the birth certificate tighter, the ink smudged from rain but still legible, proof of a life stolen before she could even speak her own name. In the reflection of a cracked mirror hanging in the hall, her face split into two fragments, half belonging, half forgotten. The silence pressed in. Somewhere deep in the house, a door creaked open on its own. One name stayed. One name vanished. But neither belonged to who she thought. The conference room smelled faintly of mildew and old paper, the kind of air that had forgotten how to move. Mara sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her damp hair plastered against her face, the torn birth certificate pressed like a wound against her chest. The lawyers, a half circle of starched suits and narrowed eyes, stared at her as if she were a contagion. "Enough of this circus," one of them snapped. He was older, heavy-set, with a ruddy face and hands that trembled only when he tried to hide them. These claims resurface every year. She's a fraud. They always are. Mara kept her eyes low, counting the faded cracks in the tabletop. She had learned that silence often told them more than words could dot in her mind. The memory bled in: a foster home, peeling paint, a single backpack tossed on a cot. She had rifled through it in secret that night, heart hammering, and found the certificate folded inside, soaked from rain, her mother's handwriting smeared but legible. It was the first proof she had ever belonged to someone. "I know the East Wing," Mara said quietly, every head turned. She looked up, meeting their startled faces. The long corridor ends with a mural of a stag. There's a sealed door behind. You hide things there, don't you? Evelyn Cole, seated near the window, shifted in her chair. She was younger than the rest, sharp-featured but tired-eyed. Her pen paused mid-note. She studied Mara with something more complex than suspicion. You could have seen a floor plan. Another lawyer shot back, though his voice cracked. "Trespassed years ago. It proves nothing." Mara's mouth was dry, but she held his gaze. "Then ask me the vault code prefix." She whispered the numbers. She didn't even know how she knew them, only that they had lived in the back of her mind. Like an echo, Evelyn's pen slipped from her fingers. One of the men stood so quickly. His chair screeched against the floor. "This is ridiculous. We should call the police now and have her removed." Mara didn't flinch. "Call them," she said softly. "But I'm not leaving until I see the nursery upstairs." That word nursery hung in the room like a curse. Evelyn cleared her throat. "Nursery?" Mara nodded. "The locked room at the top of the stairs. I know it's still there." The older lawyer scoffed, but there was sweat beading at his hairline now. "She's bluffing." But Evelyn wasn't so. "Sure." She glanced at the men, then at Mara, her voice measured. "Why do you want to see it?" "Because," Mara said, her fingers brushing the frayed edge of the certificate, "it's the only place left that remembers me." The room went silent. Even the rain outside seemed to hold its breath. One of the men leaned forward, his tone softening, almost paternal. "Listen, this place ruins people. Do yourself a favor and walk away before it swallows you too." For a moment, Mara saw something raw flicker in his eyes, a fear he didn't dare name. But she didn't move. She felt the shift inside herself, the shame that had burned her skin all morning, hardening into something colder, heavier. "I'm not afraid of ghosts," she said. The lawyers began gathering their papers, muttering about restraining orders and forged documents. Evelyn lingered, hesitant, and when she finally stood, she slid a small USB drive from the table into her pocket without anyone noticing. Mara watched her, recognizing an ally who didn't yet know she was one. She rose from her chair and turned toward the door. Down the hall, the grand staircase spiraled upward into shadow. She could almost see the locked nursery door at the top, the brass knob tarnished with time. Her hand tightened around the birth certificate as she started forward. If she opened the nursery door, would the truth finally step out, or another ghost? The staircase groaned under Mara's weight, as though the house itself disapproved. Dust rose in small clouds with every step, catching the thin slice of light filtering through a cracked window. She climbed anyway, one hand gripping the banister, the other clutching the crumpled birth certificate. Below, voices hissed lawyers Evelyn, someone demanding she stop, but she didn't turn around. At the landing, the hallway stretched like a throat. The carpet was worn to threads, the wallpaper peeling in curled tongues. She could hear her heartbeat louder than the murmurs behind her. Halfway down the corridor, she saw it, a small door, sealed with a tarnished brass knob dulled by time. Memory rose uninvited. A woman's hand brushing her hair back from her forehead. The smell of milk and lavender soap, a lullaby hummed low and aching. She was lifted from a crib in this very room, her mother's locket glinting against her chin, and then rough hands yanked her away. The door had slammed. That was the last she remembered. "Don't," a voice warned behind her. Evelyn. She sounded uncertain, as though she wanted to believe Mara but feared what the truth might cost. Mara's fingers tightened around the knob. It stuck for a moment, then yielded with a sound like a sob. The door swung inward. The nursery was frozen in time. Dust lay thick over untouched toys. A wooden rocking horse, a stack of picture books curled at the edges, a doll with one glass eye. In the corner stood a crib. She stepped closer and saw her name carved into the frame, each letter shaky but deliberate. Mara. She pressed her palm to it, and for a moment the room felt alive. She could almost hear her mother singing. Almost. Evelyn entered quietly. Her gaze swept the room, resting on the crib before flicking back to Mara. "You knew this was here," she said softly, not a question. Mara nodded, though she didn't know how she'd known. The certainty had lived in her bones. Evelyn crouched by a small trunk and brushed off a layer of dust. The latch resisted, then snapped. Inside lay a collection of envelopes tied with string, the top one marked "Sealed Adoption Records." Evelyn's brow furrowed as she skimmed a document. "The patriarch. He hid a child," she whispered, "after a scandal." Mara's breath caught. "Me." "Maybe," Evelyn said, though her voice trembled, through the cracked nursery window. Mara caught a flicker of movement outside. A figure standing at the edge of the estate grounds, still and watching. By the time she blinked, they were gone. She shivered and turned back to Evelyn. "I'm not leaving. I want a DNA test." "I want proof," Evelyn hesitated. "This could get dangerous. If you're right, people will do anything to protect what's left of this family." "I don't care," Mara said, her voice steady now. "I've lived as a ghost long enough." The words had barely left her mouth when the house exploded with noise. The alarm blared, red lights strobing down the hallway. Evelyn jolted to her feet. "They're inside," she said, voice sharp with fear. Mara stood frozen, the siren washing. The room in pulsing crimson. Her gaze darted to the door, to the window, to the carved crib that anchored her to the floor. Then she understood. The intruder didn't want money. They wanted Mara gone permanently. Glass crunched beneath Mara's shoes as she stepped into the wreckage. The morning light cut through the shattered windows in hard slants, exposing the chaos left behind. Drawers overturned, papers shredded, filing cabinets gutted as if by claws. Her breath hung in the air, thin and uneven. The house no longer felt like stone and wood. It felt hunted. Evelyn was already there, crouched near the desk, a torn file in her hand. "They knew what to look for," she murmured. "Every cabinet, every folder connected to the Langley account's gone." She looked up at Mara, and something unspoken flickered in her eyes. Fear. Mara stepped closer, fingertips grazing the jagged edge of a window pane. The cold metal bit into her skin, and a flash of memory ripped through her. A child huddled in a closet. Someone's voice hissing her father's name like a curse. She didn't know why she remembered that moment now, but the dread was the same. "They want me erased," Mara said. Her voice cracked on the last word. Evelyn stood, brushing glass from her coat. "Someone connected to this family is behind it. They're terrified you'll prove who you are." She hesitated. "I might know who can help. A former housekeeper, Mrs. Kane. She was close to the patriarch back then, maybe too close." Later, the woman's small kitchen smelled faintly of bleach and bread. Mrs. Kane's hands trembled as she poured tea into chipped cups. She was older now, her once black hair shot with silver, but her eyes were sharp. "Your father," Mrs. Kane said after a long silence, "didn't disappear. He ran. They blamed him for what happened to your mother. But I never believed he was guilty. He loved her, loved you. He's alive, I'm certain. Hiding because they would destroy him if he surfaced." Mara's throat closed. "Where is he?" "I don't know," Mrs. Kane admitted, voice softening. "But if you keep digging, you'll find him. And they'll find you first." But the photo hid something worse. When Mara returned to the estate that evening, the air felt wrong before she even reached the door. She paused on the threshold, noticing the envelope tucked neatly beneath the doormat. No stamp. No address. She tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a photograph, faded at the edges. She was a child in the picture, no older than 3, standing in the nursery crib. Her mother's locket was visible around her tiny neck, but the smile on her face made Mara's stomach twist. It was the last time she'd looked safe. Across the photo, in thick red ink, someone had scrawled a message: "Stop digging, or you'll end up like her." Mara's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped it. Evelyn stepped behind her, catching her arm. "Mara," she whispered, "you're not safe here." The warning felt like a prophecy. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked, though no one had stepped on it. Mara clutched the photograph against her chest. Her reflection fractured in the hallway's cracked mirror. One half of her face was lit by the dying sunlight, the other swallowed in shadow. The picture proved someone had watched Mara her entire life and knew exactly where she was now. The house was silent except for the hollow creak of their footsteps. On the old floorboards, Mara moved slowly through the east wing, the beam of her flashlight sliding over dust-thick furniture and peeling wallpaper like a memory trying to surface. Evelyn followed close behind, clutching a crowbar in one hand, a folder of half-burned documents in the other. They stopped when Mara knelt near a warped section of floor. She had noticed it earlier, the way the boards bowed slightly inward, as though hiding something beneath. Her fingers hovered over the seam, remembering another time. A child crouched behind a bed frame, listening to boots in the hall. Her mother whispering, "Stay still, don't make a sound." The memory tightened her chest. She pried the boards loose one by one until a hollow cavity revealed itself. Inside was a small wooden box, its latch rusted and weak. Mara hesitated, then opened it. Cassette tapes. Dozens of them, each labeled with dates from years ago. She picked one up, her thumb brushing across the faded ink. Evelyn grabbed a nearby player from the debris and fed the tape into it. The recording crackled before voices spilled out. 2 men, their words low and vicious. "The girl must disappear. We can't afford another scandal." Mara's stomach lurched. "That's him," Evelyn whispered. "The patriarch. He's covering something. These could bury the entire estate." Mara pressed her hands to the box as though it were an anchor. The tapes didn't just implicate the family. They proved the lengths they would go to protect themselves. But the photo hid something worse. She needed answers from someone who had been there. Hours later, she stood in Mrs. Kane's kitchen again, the box on the table between them. The woman's weathered hands trembled as she touched the tapes. "They killed her," Mara said, her voice breaking. "Didn't they? My mother?" Mrs. Kane didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "Your mother died protecting you. The patriarch feared she would ruin him, expose what he had done. She hid these tapes, knowing they'd try to erase you too." Mara felt the shame in her body curdle into anger. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Mrs. Kane looked at her with tired eyes. "Because surviving this family means staying silent. I thought your father would come for you, but he didn't." "My father?" Mara's voice caught. "He's alive," Mrs. Kane whispered. "He ran after the scandal. Everyone believes he's dead, but I've heard whispers. He's the only one left who can confirm all of this." The revelation knocked the air from Mara's lungs. "If he's alive, why hasn't he come for me?" Mrs. Kane reached for her hand, but Mara pulled away. She felt small, abandoned all over again. A ghost no one wanted to claim. Back at the estate, Evelyn stacked the tapes on the table like evidence for a trial that hadn't yet begun. "These could win everything," she said softly. "But they'll come for us the moment they know we have them. We have to be ready, Mara nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking of a man she couldn't remember, a man who had chosen to vanish rather than fight for her. She stared down at the crib panel she'd brought from the nursery, her name carved into the wood in letters worn by time. If her father was alive, why had he never come for her? The cabin was little more than rotting timber and shadows, swallowed by the forest. Mara stood on the threshold, the wind tugging at her coat, heart hammering as if it knew something her mind refused to accept. A single light burned inside, yellow and weak, like a secret afraid of being seen. She stepped in. He was there, older than she'd imagined, his face weathered by fear and years of hiding, but the shape of his jaw was familiar. Her father sat hunched at a table littered with scraps of paper and half-burned photographs. When he looked up, the locket she wore, her mother's locket, reflected in his eyes, and for a flicker of a second he almost reached for her. Then he stopped himself. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Mara swallowed the words that wanted to pour out. Instead, she sat opposite him, the air heavy with the smell of ash and damp wood. "They told me you were dead," she said. "They wanted you to think that," he answered, voice fraying. "It was the only way to keep you alive." She wanted to scream, to ask why he hadn't come, but the pain in his eyes silenced her. He pushed a worn envelope across the table. "This is everything," he whispered. Inside was a confession letter, signed by the Langley patriarch himself. Names, dates, financial crimes that stretched decades. "He killed your mother," her father said. "She threatened to expose him. He tried to erase you because you were proof of everything he'd done." Mara gripped the envelope, feeling its weight like a stone in her hands. Evelyn, who had waited at the door, stepped closer. "This could end it," she said, her voice urgent. "We take this to court, and the estate is yours." "But you have to testify," she told him. Her father shook his head. "No, if I show my face, they'll finish what they started. You don't understand, there are people who'd kill to keep this buried." Mara stared at him, her throat burning. "So you'll just let them win?" "I can't fight them," he said. "But you can." Shame twisted into anger, and she felt small, abandoned all over again. "You left me once," she whispered. "Don't ask me to forgive you for it." But the photo hid something worse. He looked away, shoulders folding in like he'd been carrying this weight for too long. Evelyn stepped between them, gently taking Mara's arm. "We have what we need," she said softly. "We should go." The drive back was quiet, the envelope tucked between them like fragile glass. Fog clung to the road, muffling the world. Evelyn's hands tightened on the wheel. "Once this is in court, they'll come at us with everything," she said. "You're ready for that, right?" Mara nodded, though the answer felt like a lie. Then headlights flared in the rearview mirror. A car behind them, too close. "Evelyn." "I see it," Evelyn said. Voice taut. The impact came a second later, metal slamming into metal, the world spinning. The car skidded off the slick road, crashing through the guardrail. Mara's scream was swallowed by the forest. When the vehicle finally stopped, the headlights cut through the fog at an unnatural angle, lighting the ravine below like a stage. Evelyn wasn't moving. Mara crawled out, bleeding, clutching the envelope to her chest, as if it were the only thing left that mattered. She staggered toward the driver's side, the cold night pressing in, but Evelyn didn't open her eyes, and when she didn't show up at the courthouse the next morning, Mara knew the war had turned deadly. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers. Evelyn lay pale against the starched sheets, eyes fluttering open, just long enough to squeeze Mara's hand. "You can do this," she whispered, voice barely audible. Mara nodded, even though her stomach churned with dread. She left the room with the envelope of evidence clutched to her chest, the weight of it more suffocating than comforting. The courthouse was colder than she remembered. High ceilings, marble floors, voices bouncing off walls like echoes in a mausoleum. Mara walked to her seat with her head bowed, her mother's locket warm against her collarbone. The tapes, the letter signed by the patriarch, and the birth certificate were stacked neatly in front of her like offerings. She refused to look at the opposing table. The first strike came quickly. The Langley estate's attorney, a tall man with a carefully cultivated air of righteousness, stood with a thick folder in his hands. "We have new evidence," he announced. "DNA results proving Ms. Langley is not in fact a Langley at all." The words hit her like a slap. He handed the report to the judge, his voice softening as he spoke. "We sympathize, Your Honor, but it appears she has no biological tie to the family." Mara's hands went numb. But the photo hid something worse. She forced herself to look at the document. Her heart sank when she noticed the date 2 weeks earlier, before she'd even petitioned the court. It was a setup. She could see it now. The same careful handwriting that had doctored every piece of the family's dark history. She stood slowly, the scrape of her chair loud in the hushed courtroom. "That's not possible," she said, her voice shaking but steadying with every word. "They forged this. They've been forging records for years. I have proof." The attorney smirked. "What proof? Stories and suspicions?" Mara reached into the bag at her feet and pulled out the panel of wood she'd pried from the crib in the nursery. She held it up high so everyone could see the name carved there, each letter cut by her mother's hand, before she could even speak. "This predates your tampered evidence," Mara said. "This house remembered me even when you didn't." The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward, studying the panel like it was a relic. The attorney's face tightened, the mask cracking just enough to reveal the fear underneath. Mara placed the crib board gently on the table, her hands trembling. "I am Mara Langley," she said, voice breaking. "And you will not erase me." Again, the judge's gavel fell, but the decision was won. No one saw coming. The courtroom's echo still clung to Mara's skin as she stood in the Langley mansion, now hers in name. The decree had been read, the judge's gavel struck, and the fortune no one claimed was finally hers. But victory tasted like ash. The walls smelled of dust and rot, the silence filled with the ghosts of everything it had cost to win. She ran, a hand along the cracked plaster, pausing at the nursery door. For a moment she imagined it opening to her mother's humming, a life untouched by betrayal. It stayed closed. Evelyn arrived days later, leaning heavily on a cane, hospital bracelet still circling her wrist. "This place could swallow you whole," she said softly, eyes flicking to the broken windows and ivy-choked halls. "You could make it something else, a shelter, somewhere for people like you." Mara nodded, the idea a fragile thread of purpose in the wreckage. "I will," she promised. But when Evelyn left, the mansion felt heavier, not lighter. The envelope arrived. That night, no return address. Mara tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a map of the estate grounds, yellowed and brittle. A single X marked deep in the woods. She followed it at dawn. The forest was damp, mist curling low to the ground, the earth soft beneath her boots. She counted her steps until the trees parted, revealing a patch of disturbed soil at the base of an oak older than the house itself. Mara dropped to her knees, the locket at her throat warm from her breath. She dug with her bare hands until her fingers struck metal. A small box. She pulled it free, mud clinging to its edges. The latch gave with a reluctant snap. Inside was her mother's locket, the one she'd buried with her years ago, and a folded note, edges frayed with time. But the photo hid something worse. The message was written in the same looping hand she remembered from the birth certificate. "The secrets go deeper than the roots you've found. Be careful what you unearth." Mara stared at the locket in her palm, her reflection warped in its tarnished surface. She closed her fist around it until the metal bit her skin, forcing herself to breathe. She thought of Evelyn's words about the shelter, about turning the estate into a refuge. She thought of her father's hollow eyes in the cabin, the way fear had eaten him alive. She thought of the Langley name and how it had chained her like a ghost to a history she'd barely survived. But this wasn't over. She rose from the hole, mud streaking her clothes, and looked back toward the house rising through the mist. Its windows stared like watchful eyes. Mara slipped the locket over her neck, the weight of it grounding and unbearable all at once. She thought the estate's ghosts were buried, but some graves refused to stay closed. The morning light slanted through the tall windows, soft and forgiving, the way it never had when Mara was young. The Langley estate no longer smelled of mildew and dust. The air now carried the hum of life, freshly baked bread from the kitchen, children's laughter tumbling through the corridors, footsteps soft against polished floors. She stood in the grand foyer watching the children race past, their hands brushing the carved banister as if it had always belonged to them. One of the smallest, a boy with dark curls and shy eyes, stopped and tugged at the hem of her sleeve. "Was this ever your home?" he asked, voice trembling with the weight only children carried when they'd lived too many places. Mara looked around, at the restored walls, the patched roof, the warmth that had been built brick by brick. She thought of the way the house had once seemed to breathe against her, cold and hostile, waiting to swallow her whole. "Not at first," she whispered. Her fingers went to the locket at her throat, the one she had found buried in the woods years ago, its edges worn smooth by time and touch. But now it is, for all of us. But the photo hid something worse out later, when the shelter quieted and the children settled into their beds. Mara walked alone through the upper hall. Her hand traced the familiar grooves in the railing until she reached the nursery. The door was new, the paint fresh, but it still made her pause. She pushed it open slowly. The room had changed. New beds lined the walls, colorful blankets, shelves, stacked with toys that didn't hold the dust of forgotten years. Yet there was one thing she hadn't replaced: the engraved crib panel mounted on the far wall, the one with her name carved into it, proof that she had once been claimed. She approached it slowly. Time didn't heal wounds. It only taught you how to carry them differently. A voice behind her made her turn. Evelyn stood in the doorway, leaning against her cane, her smile faint but certain. "You've built something good here," she said. "Something that'll outlive all of us." Mara nodded, her throat tight. "It's what my mother would have wanted." They stood together for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the house. Then Evelyn left, her footsteps fading down the corridor, and Mara was alone. She reached up and brushed her fingers over the carved letters of her name. For a moment, the house seemed to exhale, as if it remembered. Sometimes at night, she still thought she heard the old nursery door creak open on its own, the same sound that had haunted her since childhood. She knew it was only the house settling, but she turned all the same, expecting to see her mother standing there, smiling. The doorway was empty. Mara closed the door softly behind her and walked down the hall, the locket warm against her heart. But even now, sometimes at night, she swore she heard the nursery door creak open.